Hello there, and welcome to this special boring history episode on the rather disturbing lives of the pharaohs in ancient Egypt. If you're looking for a calming and thought-provoking historical story to carry you off to dreamland, you've come to the right place. Before we begin our journey back in time, I'd love to know where in the world you're re-listening from and what time of day it is for you right now. Feel free to leave a comment and say hello. And if you enjoy this type of relaxing educational content, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Alright, let's set the stage, shall we? Imagine a land of golden deserts, lush river valleys, and monumental temples and tombs that pierce the vivid blue sky. A civilization that endured for over 3,000 years, leaving an indelible mark on human history. At the center of it all were the pharaohs, the divine rulers who wielded immense power and prestige. But behind the glittering facade of riches and royalty, the lives of these god-kings were often steeped in darkness, obsession, and shocking practices that may be hard for us to fathom today. Over the next hour or so, we'll be diving deep into the fascinating and often unsettling world of ancient Egyptian pharaohs. We'll explore their opulent daily lives inside sprawling palace complexes, their tangled webs of royal relationships and rivalries, and their unshakable belief in their own divinity. We'll also confront the pharaohs' fixation on death and the afterlife, which drove them to construct ever more elaborate tombs and temples, and even led some to engage in the chilling practice of human sacrifice. By the end of our journey, we'll have encountered influential figures like Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, King Tut, and Ramses II, and traced the captivating mysteries modern archaeologists are still unraveling about their lives and times. It's a story of power, magic, obsession, and eternal legacies that have enthralled the world for centuries. So, dim the lights, settle in, and let the intrigues of ancient Egypt softly whisk you away on the wings of history. But before we fully immerse ourselves in the distant past, let's first zoom out and take an ancient Egyptian civilization at its height, stretching from around 3100 BCE, 230 BCE. Ancient Egypt was one of the first and longest-lasting, complex societies in human history. The kingdom was born when King Monis unified the disparate tribes of the lush Nile Valley into a single state, taking advantage of the River S. fertile floodplains to fuel an agricultural revolution that would be the envy of the ancient world. Over the centuries, Egypt grew into a powerhouse of wealth, culture, and influence, its lands stretching from the Mediterranean Sea to deep into Nubia in the south. The pharaohs presided over a centralized state with a sophisticated bureaucracy, groundbreaking technological advancements like the ox-drawn plow and sailboats, and a rich culture that produced timeless works of art, architecture, and literature. The Egyptians developed one of the world's earliest writing systems in the form of hieroglyphics, as well as a 365-day calendar that tracked the annual flooding of the Nile with uncanny precision. But perhaps their most visible and enduring achievements were the colossal monuments they left behind. The Great Pyramids, sprawling temple complexes, and subterranean tombs hewn into cliffs. These awe-inspiring feats of engineering served to project the godlike power and prestige of the pharaohs, while also hinting at the depths of their obsession with death and eternity. For the pharaohs, this earthly life was but a prelude to a glorious and well-provisioned immortality, and they would bend immense resources and human capital to securing their share of forever. At the center of this remarkable civilization were the pharaohs themselves, the divine kings who ruled as the living embodiment of the god Horus on earth. The pharaoh was the supreme authority in all matters of state, religion, and war, wielding a level of power and influence that would be almost unimaginable today. He, or in rare cases she, was responsible for maintaining order and balance in the cosmos, placating the gods with rituals and offerings, and ensuring the prosperity and protection of the Egyptian people. But this exalted status came with a dark side as well. As we'll soon discover, the pharaohs were bound by an intricate and often brutal web of rituals, superstitions, and obligations that governed every aspect of their lives and deaths. From the incestuous marriages they contracted to keep the royal bloodline pure to the servants and pets they took with them into the grave, to the shocking acts of deification and human sacrifice some pharaohs engaged in. The lives of these divine rulers were often steeped in as much darkness as light. So as we set off to explore the private lives and enduring legacy of some of history's most iconic and influential rulers, brace yourself for a journey into the captivating, beguiling, and at times disturbing world of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Let us begin by imagining a day in the life of a pharaoh at the height of the new kingdom around 1500 BCE. Dawn breaks gently over the shining limestone walls of the pharaoh's sprawling palace complex at Thebes. The king and his entourage are roused from their sleep by the soft sound of blind musicians serenading the sunrise as barefoot servants pad silently through torch-lit halls bearing trays of delicacies to break the royal fast. In the palace's colonnaded courtyards, songbirds flit among lush gardens and burbling fountains as tamed baboons and lion cubs lounge in the shade. The pharaoh emerges from his bedchamber, accompanied by a series of body servants who have spent the last hour attending to his elaborate grooming regimen. They've shaved his head and body silky smooth to stave off lice, lined his eyes with striking kohl and green malachite, and anointed his limbs with fragrant oils and perfumes. Gold and electrum gleam at his throat and wrists, while an exquisite crown in the shape of a falcon encircles his brow, a symbol of his divine kinship with the god Horus. Thus arrayed in all his finery, the living god strides forth to begin his packed schedule of daily duties and devotions. First on the agenda is a visit to the palace shrine to make offerings and libations to the chief gods: Re, the sun god; Osiris, the god of the underworld, and the pharaoh's own deified ancestors. Chanting priests fill the incense-perfumed air with hymns and prayers as the king prostrates himself before the serene painted gazes of the gods. With his religious obligations discharged, the pharaoh convenes his council to hear petitions, dispense judgments, and consult on affairs of state. Seated on a golden throne, he listens as his vizier reads out the day's business: boundary disputes to settle, trade agreements to negotiate, construction projects to oversee. Though he solicits advice from his most trusted courtiers, the final word on all matters ultimately rests with him. The day wears on in a blur of ceremonies and spectacles designed to awe the populace and reinforce the pharaoh's divine right to rule. The king processes through the city in a magnificent chariot, the cheers of his subjects rising like a wave as he showers them with gifts of gold and grain. He officiates over the ritual opening of a new temple, driving in the first peg with a golden mallet as priests chant incantations to seal the sacred space. But even in these moments of public triumph, an undercurrent of dark superstition and obsessive ritual runs beneath the surface. The pharaoh is careful to always enter a room right foot first to ward off evil spirits. He eats only with his left hand, reserving his right for communing with the gods. And he never, ever allows his shadow to fall across a priest or a statue of a deity, lest he incur divine wrath that could bring ruin upon the kingdom. As Re's fiery orb sinks slowly toward the western horizon, the pharaoh retires to his private quarters for a few snatched moments of relaxation before the evening banquet. Dancing girls sway sinuously to the strains of harps and lyres, while the king sips date wine from a golden goblet and contemplates the finer points of theology with his advisors. But even in repose, the spectre of death and eternity are never far from his mind. For the pharaoh knows that this mortal life, however opulent and godlike, is but a fleeting dream compared to the glorious forever that awaits him in the field of reeds. It's why he's already poured untold resources into his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, a hidden city of the dead where he will reign in splendor for all eternity. But first, he must navigate the tangled web of obligations and dangers that come with wearing the double crown. And nowhere are those perils more present than in his own royal household. From the day he ascends the throne, one of the pharaoh's most pressing duties is to secure the succession by producing a male heir. But in the incestuous hothouse of the royal family, where pharaohs routinely wed their siblings and even their own children to keep the bloodline pure, the battle for power and influence is always seething just beneath the gilded surface. The king's great royal wife may be his half-sister, but that doesn't stop her from plotting with priests and courtiers to advance her own son's claim to the throne over that of his older half-brother. Indeed, the annals of Egyptian history are littered with tales of palace intrigue, rival queens, and ruthless power plays between potential heirs. Take the remarkable story of Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh who ruled as king in her own right for over 20 years in the 15th century BCE. Though she was originally just a regent for her young stepson Thutmose III, Hatshepsut slowly consolidated power, adopting all the masculine trappings of kingship and even depicting herself with a beard in official artwork. Or consider the shocking tale of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, who appended centuries of religious tradition by proclaiming the sun disk Aten-En as the one true god and outlawing the worship of all others. In his religious zeal, Akhenaten even changed his name from Amenhotep IV to reflect his devotion to Aten, moved the capital to a remote desert city, and persecuted the powerful priests of Amen. His reign was plagued by palace conspiracies and ended in disaster with his young son Tutankhamun left to pick up the pieces. But perhaps the most disturbing example of how the pharaoh's godlike power could be abused is the practice of human sacrifice that was once disturbingly common in ancient Egypt. Archaeologists have unearthed numerous so-called retainer sacrifices in the tombs of early kings like J and Jet, where dozens of servants were slaughtered to continue serving their master in the afterlife. Even more chillingly, some pharaohs like Aha were buried with their pets and worldly treasures, as well as piles of human hair wigs, likely shorn from sacrificial victims. Thankfully, this ghastly practice seems to have died out by the end of the Old Kingdom, as the Egyptians developed more symbolic ways for pharaohs to take their earthly entourage with them into the afterlife. But it remains a dark stain on the otherwise glittering legacy of the pharaohs, a reminder of the unfathomable gulf that separated these divine kings from the teeming masses they ruled over. As the centuries roll on, the pharaohs continued to shape the course of Egyptian history and leave their mark in stone and story. Some, like Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great, presided over the kingdom at the height of its power and splendor. Their triumphs and love lives immortalized on the walls of the temples they built to their own glory. Others, like the fabled Cleopatra II, became entangled in the high-stakes intrigues of the wider Mediterranean world. Their personal charisma and political savvy, the stuff of enduring legend. But perhaps no pharaoh has captured the modern imagination quite like the boy king Tutankhamun, whose lavish tomb discovery in 1922 set off a global wave of Tosha and turned the once obscure ruler into a household name. The dazzling treasures found in Tut's tomb, from his iconic golden death mask to the nested coffins and thrones, provided an unprecedented glimpse into the opulence and artistry of a royal burial and cemented the pharaoh's reputation as the ultimate status symbols of the ancient world. Today, new archaeological discoveries and cutting-edge scientific techniques are allowing us to peer even deeper into the lives and deaths of these endlessly fascinating rulers. CT scans and DNA analysis have revealed the inbred genetic deformities that plagued Tut's family line, as well as the festering wounds and malaria that likely claimed his life at the tender age of 19. Inscriptions and papyri paint an increasingly vivid picture of the cutthroat world of palace politics, where foreign concubines and scheming viziers jostled for influence in the shadow of the throne. And yet, for all the dark secrets and unsettling practices we've uncovered about the pharaohs, their luminous legacy as some of the most iconic and enduring rulers in human history remains For over 3,000 years, they presided over a civilization of remarkable achievements and innovations. From the mathematical precision of the pyramids to the medical know-how of the world's first brain surgery, they inspired some of the most sublime and enduring works of art and architecture ever created. From the serene beauty of Nefertiti's limestone bust to the colossal majesty of the Colossi of Menon, and they continue to fire our imaginations and tug at our sense of wonder, inviting us to contemplate the mysteries of absolute power and ponder what it means to reach for immortality in the face of the fleeting nature of human life. So the next time you find yourself gazing up at the inscrutable face of the Sphinx or marveling at the golden splendor of Tutankhamun's mask, take a moment to reflect on the pharaohs who once wielded godlike power over the lives of millions. Theirs is a story of dazzling triumphs and shocking abuses, soaring monuments and chilling body counts, unimaginable wealth and existential dread in the face of eternity. It's a story that reminds us of the heights of human achievement and the depths of our capacity for cruelty, the unquenchable thirst for immortality, and the inescapable reality of death. And it's a story that will continue to captivate us as long as the timeless stones of ancient Egypt keep their secrets close, inviting each new generation to unravel anew the endlessly fascinating riddle of the pharaohs. And with that, we've reached the end of our whirlwind tour through the disturbing and dazzling lives of ancient Egyptian pharaohs. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most iconic and influential civilizations, and that the stories of these larger-than-life rulers have provided some rich food for thought as you drift off to sleep. As always, thanks so much for tuning in to Boring History and for spending a portion of your day exploring the endlessly fascinating nooks and crannies of our shared human story. If you've enjoyed this immersive journey into the distant past, I'd be thrilled if you could hit that subscribe button and leave a comment, sharing your thoughts on the pharaohs and their fairy-acting legacy. Until next time, sweet dreams, and may your reveries be filled with the golden light of the eternal sun disk, the lush reeds of the field of reeds, and the whispered secrets of the kings and queens who once ruled as living gods over the shimmering sands of ancient Egypt. Good night. As we've seen, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt lived lives of opulence and grandeur, almost unimaginable today. But behind the glittering facade of gold and gods lay a darker reality, one of unchecked power, mystical obsessions, and the ever-present specter of death. Perhaps no pharaoh embodied these contradictions more than Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great. Ascending to the throne around 1279 BC, Ramses would rule for an astonishing 66 years, one of the longest reigns in Egyptian history. He presided over an era of great prosperity and embarked on a massive building campaign, erecting temples, obelisks, and statues across the empire. Step into the world of ancient Egypt, a land of golden sands and monumental wonders. But beneath the shimmering surface of this powerful civilization lies a darker, more disturbing truth about its rulers, the god-kings, the pharaohs. Let's peel back the gilded layers and expose the vanity, cruelty, and exploitation that built this legendary empire. Take Ramses II, often called Ramses the Great. His reign is seen as a golden age, but it was a golden age built on an ego as colossal as the statues he erected. These weren't just monuments, they were declarations of his own divinity, meant to awe and intimidate his subjects for eternity. Ramses' thirst for glory was insatiable. He fathered over 100 children with a vast harem of wives and concubines, treating the royal lineage like a personal project. He was a master of propaganda, shamelessly defacing the temples of his predecessors, chiseling out their names and replacing them with his own. His colossal statues, some towering over 80 feet tall, were pure, deified narcissism. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Ramses' reign was his preparation for the afterlife. His sprawling tomb complex, the Ramesseum, was more than a tomb. It was a city. It was served by a massive population of priests, artisans, and slaves, all dedicated to his eternal comfort. He spared no expense, packing his final resting place with unimaginable treasures, golden chariots, exquisite furniture, and intricately carved alabaster vessels. He even had his beloved pet lion mummified to accompany him into the next world. Disturbingly, recent discoveries suggest that Ramses didn't intend to go alone. Archaeologists believe many of his household staff, including members of his harem, were ritually sacrificed upon his death. Their bodies were found posed as if they were still serving him, forever waiting on their divine master. It's a gruesome reminder of the absolute power these pharaohs wielded, where the lives of others were mere accessories for their own journey to immortality. Ramses the Great may have presided over a magnificent era, but his legacy was literally built with the blood and sweat of countless ordinary people, all in service of his own delusions of divinity. And Ramses was far from an exception. This pattern of abuse was a hallmark of the pharaohs. His predecessors, like Amenhotep III and Akhenaten, launched their own ambitious, self-serving building projects that drained the kingdom's resources. The famous boy king Tutankhamun was entombed with a staggering hoard of treasures, while his people likely struggled. And Cleopatra, the last of her line, ruthlessly eliminated her own siblings to secure her throne. Time and again, the pharaohs demonstrated that their divine status placed them above all moral laws. They could rewrite religious traditions on a whim, take endless partners, and seize property and labor without a second thought. They could even ritualize murder, all without consequence. The promise of a glorious, godlike afterlife made this megalomaniacal excess not just acceptable, but almost inevitable. Before the sun even crested the horizon, the pharaoh's day began. This wasn't a simple wake-up call. It was a sacred ritual. He would be bathed in a hallowed pool or cleansed with holy water by priests, a process believed to purify both body and soul. Then came the dressing ceremony. He was draped in the finest linens and adorned with the potent symbols of his power, the double crown of a unified Egypt, the scepter of authority, and the shepherd's crook, representing his role as the guide of his people. Every single item held deep spiritual significance. Even these seemingly mundane morning tasks were a performance. Every movement was a carefully choreographed dance, governed by the strict rules of Mat, the cosmic principle of order, truth, and justice that held the universe together. To deviate even slightly from these divine protocols was to invite chaos and risk the fury of the gods. It was a crushing, existential weight to carry, but for a living God on earth, it was an absolute necessity. But as all tyrants eventually learn, no mortal can escape death. For all their magnificent temples, sprawling tombs, magical spells, and sacrificial servants, the pharaohs succumbed to the same fate as the humblest peasant. Their meticulously mummified bodies and worldly possessions gathered dust in the darkness as their empire declined and their gods were forgotten. Their story is a timeless cautionary tale, echoing through the ages to our modern world of would-be strongmen and self-styled demigods. Anyone who believes they are above the common bonds of morality and mortality should remember how the mightiest rulers of Egypt met their ultimate, ignominious end. The great leveler comes for kings and commoners alike, a humbling lesson 3,000 years in the making. As we close this chapter, it's incredible to think how much has been lost to the devouring sands of time. We've unearthed their treasures and unraveled some secrets, but so much remains a mystery. Perhaps, as archaeologists continue to chip away at the layers of history, we'll gain an even clearer picture of the shadows that lurked behind the pharaoh's dazzling reign, a deeper understanding of what drove these divine rulers to such incredible heights of power and such profound depths of depravity. Until then, they will continue to haunt our imaginations, spectacular, sphinx-like figures cloaked in gold and mystery. We can only guess what other chilling revelations lie buried in the Valley of the Kings, waiting to see the light of day once more. These are tales of tyrants and god-kings, faded to dust but etched in eternity. A powerful reminder that not even the grandest empires can escape time's relentless march. Divine, decadent, and ultimately undone by their own towering egos. The Pharaoh's day typically began at sunrise with a ceremonial cleansing by priests, followed by a grand procession out to the main temple for ritual offerings and worship. As a living god, this direct link to the divine was the pharaoh's most vital duty necessary to maintain Marat. He would present statuettes of himself as offerings and libate, wine, milk, and other precious liquids before the gods. Incense would be burned, prayers recited, and sacred magic enacted through liturgies and hymns. After the morning rituals, the pharaoh would attend to the business of state, receiving ministers' reports, settling legal cases, and issuing decrees on everything from irrigation projects to mining expeditions. He would also engage in more ceremonial duties as the day progressed, from officiating over agricultural festivals to commissioning monumental building works in his name. The pharaoh's workday was interspersed with breaks for meals, recreation, and rest. Meals were sumptuous affairs with the pharaoh, entitled to the choicest cuts of meat, the freshest produce from palace gardens, and delicacies like honey, figs, and dates. Servants would swat flies with long fans and offer water to wash. Recreation might include hunting, board games like Sinet, or watching performances by musicians, dancers, and acrobats. Some pharaohs enjoyed swimming in palace pools or taking a langangerous barge ride down the Nile. But even in leisure, there was little respite from ritual and responsibility. If the pharaoh opted for a pleasure cruise, it would be aboard a gilded barge hung with fluttering pennants rowed by crews of servants as he relaxed under a canopy with his family and courtiers. If he retired to his harem for the evening, he was still expected to spend time with his great royal wife and produce heirs to secure the dynasty. The god-king's life was a goldfish bowl of relentless public scrutiny and expectation. While the pharaoh's magnificent surroundings and godlike status may seem enviable, it was in truth an intensely demanding and precarious existence. The smallest lapse in upholding Marat, whether ritual or moral, could unleash the furies of fate upon the entire land. He was like an acrobat crossing the Nile on a gossamer thread, poised between the earthly and the eternal. The burden of his office was an exhausting marathon of pageantry and weighty decisions with the highest possible stakes in play. As the pharaoh finally retired for the evening, borne aloft on a gilded palanquin to his royal bedchamber, the day's exertions would take their toll. Falling into a dreamless sleep, he could at last slip the yoke of ritual and protocol. However briefly, in the morning, the great wheel would turn once more, and the demigod would re-emerge to greet the rising sun. But in those darkest hours before dawn, the pharaoh's chamber was a hushed sanctum of shadows and murmuring breaths, of stillness and quiet. Here, in night's forgiving embrace, he was merely human once more. Royal relationships and rivalries. The ancient Egyptian royal court was a hothouse of political intrigue, power plays, and much of avili. At its apex was the pharaoh himself, the nucleus around which courtiers, officials, priests, and supplicants all revolved like planets around the sun. But the pharaoh was far from alone in his gilded cage. From incestuous marriages to murderous feuds, the intimate relationships and sting rivalries of the royal household were an eternal wellspring of drama to rival any soap opera. The women who surrounded the pharaoh were some of the most influential and intriguing figures in the palace. Foremost among them was the great royal wife, the queen who was meant to be the pharaoh's favorite consort and chief partner in ruling Egypt. Many queens wielded substantial power in their own right, with some like Nefertiti and Hatshepsut even eclipsing their husband's authority. Nefertiti, the legendary beauty and great royal wife of the oddball pharaoh Akhenaten, may have reigned as a full-fledged Kurula beside him during the height of the Amarna period's religious upheaval. She vanished mysteriously from the record in Akhenaten's final years, but some tantalizing clues hint that she may have even succeeded him as the shrouded pharaohess. The jury is still out on that enigma. Hatshepsut's unprecedented power play was even more dramatic. As the royal daughter, wife, and mother of kings, Hatshepsut was uniquely poised to make her move when her young stepson, Thutmose II, inherited the throne, first serving as his regent. Hatshepsut soon assumed the full titles and regalia of a king in her own right, dropping the feminine endings from her royal name. For over 2 decades, Egypt had a female pharaoh in all but anatomy, dominating a time of immense prosperity and monumental building. Only after her death did Thutmose III emerge from the shadow of his formidable stepmother. But being the pharaoh's chief wife and queen was no guarantee of an easy life. In a polygamous palace, the queen always had to stay on her toes to maintain her influence and guard against rivals. One of the most infamous examples was the bitter war between Ramses II, chief queen Nefertari, and the secondary wife, Isetnafret, mother of the heir apparent. Court gossip gleefully chronicled how the two powerful women schemed ceaselessly against each other, using everything from lavish banquets to slanderous graffiti to sway the pharaoh's favor. The stakes in this Game of Thrones were immensely high, as queens vied to secure the succession for their own sons. Isnefret ultimately triumphed, living to see her son Manpar take the throne, but only after decades of cutthroat intrigue. Such vicious rivalries between a pharaoh's wives were par for the palace course. Pharaohs often married their sisters, daughters, and even mothers in an attempt to keep the royal lineage as pure as possible. The Greek Ptolemaic dynasty took this to extremes, with the family tree knotting back on itself in a snarl tangle of repeated incestuous unions. Cleopatra II, the most famous toy of all, was actually the product of at least 3 generations of uninterrupted brother marriages. Her family seemed to be competing to rack up the most convoluted incestuous relationships with uncle-niece, and even double sibling matches thrown in for good measure. Ironically, all this incestuous inbreeding may have produced the genetic quirks and mental instability that ultimately doomed the dynasty. The pharaoh was seen as the earthly embodiment of Horus, the divine son of Osiris and Isis, a brother-sister pair who also happened to be husband and wife. By emulating the gods' incestuous marriage, the pharaoh was upholding the cosmic order and literally following in the footsteps of the gods. Of course, such sibling marriages must have taken a heavy toll both psychologically and genetically. The famous Tutankhamun was the sickly, short-lived product of an incestuous match between Akhenaten and his sister. His congenitally deformed foot and cleft palate point to the deleterious effects of inbreeding. But to the ancient Egyptians, purity of blood was far more important than genetic diversity. Incest was therefore not a taboo, but a sacred tradition. If rivalries between wives were vicious, those between potential heirs could be downright murderous. Primogeniture was not a hard and fast rule in ancient Egypt, meaning that any son or even daughter of the pharaoh could potentially make a play for the throne. This often led to cutthroat power struggles and grim succession crises as rival princes schemed to eliminate their competitors. One notorious example was Amenhotep, the founder of the powerful 12th dynasty, an advisor to the previous king. Amenhotep launched a successful coup and had himself crowned as the new pharaoh. But his reign was plagued by constant conspiracies and assassination attempts as rival factions jockeyed for power. His own harem even launched a shadowy plot against his life, creeping into the royal bedchamber with daggers drawn. So shaken was Amen, hat by his brush with death, that he took the unprecedented step of crowning his son Senes as co-pharaoh during his own lifetime. By securing the succession early, Amenhotep aimed to stave off further intrigues and smooth the transfer of power. Realpolitik trumped tradition. Amenhotep's instructions to his son, a treatise on effective kingship, reflect his embattled cynicism. Be on your guard against all subordinates, because you cannot be sure who is plotting against you. Perhaps the ultimate example of a royal rivalry turned deadly was the grim fall of Ramses III, the last great pharaoh of the New Kingdom. Court records paint a sordid picture of a geriatric pharaoh with a harem of hundreds driven by factionalism as rival wives scheme to put their sons on the throne. One wife, Tia, hatched an audacious plot to assassinate Ramses and crown her son Pentawere in a coup. The conspiracy was uncovered at the 11th hour, but not before a bloody skirmish between guards loyal to Tai and those protecting the pharaoh. In the end, Ramses' own throat was slit, likely by an assassin who wormed his way into the royal harem. The king lingered just long enough to appoint his designated heir and round up the ringleaders of the failed coup. Even in death, royal rivalries refused to rest. Such ruthless intrigues and lethal power plays were all too common in the pharaoh's court, where the knives were perpetually out. Trust and loyalty were luxuries few could afford, with even family members potential enemies vying for position. Caught in this tangled web of shaky alliances and seething resentments, the pharaoh had to walk a razor's edge, vigilantly balancing factions while watching his own back. Heavy was the head that wore the double crown. Gods on earth, the pharaoh as divine ruler. More than mere monarchs, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt were living deities straddling the boundary between the earthly and divine. Each pharaoh was seen as the embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed sky god, and the son of the great sun god, Re. As the practice of retainer sacrifice, also known as retainer burial, was one of the most chilling customs in ancient Egypt. The idea was that servants, both human and animal, who attended the pharaoh in life would continue to serve him in death and the afterlife. This was seen as an honor to accompany one's king for eternity. But to our modern sensibilities, it's a staggering loss of life in the name of royal luxury. Some of the earliest evidence of retainer sacrifice comes from subsidiary graves around the royal tombs of the first dynasty pharaohs at Abid. These subsidiary graves contained the remains of servants, as well as food, furniture, jewelry, and tools, all the things deemed necessary to serve the pharaoh in the afterlife. The tomb of King Jia is a striking example. Excavations revealed 318 subsidiary burials around his tomb with servants' bodies arranged in neat rows believed to have been sacrificed upon J's death. Even more unsettling are the animal sacrifices found in pharaonic tombs. Many kings were buried with their beloved pets to keep them company: hunting dogs, cats, monkeys, gazelles, and more. But some animal graves are on a whole different scale. The tomb of King Horahar contained 10 donkeys that had carried his funeral gifts. King Nama's tomb held 10 dogs. The first dynasty pharaoh Waj was even buried with no less than 12 baboons, creatures considered sacred to the god Thoth. But perhaps the most bizarre burial good of all was human hair. Lots and lots of it. Archaeologists uncovered a staggering 30 million animal mummies and 80 tons of human hair in a series of vast catacombs beneath the temple of Anubis at Sukkot. Much of this hair is believed to have been shorn from servants and offered to the jackal-headed god of embalming as a plea for the deceased pharaoh's safe journey to the afterlife. As staggering as these numbers are, it's important to note that human sacrifice was not constant throughout ancient Egyptian history. It seems to have been practiced only in the early dynastic period, phasing out as mummification and more symbolic burial goods took precedence. By the time of the New Kingdom, human sacrifices had disappeared, replaced by Shabti figurines meant to magically come alive and act as servants in the afterlife. Still, those early royal tombs with their grim galleries of subsidiary burials leave a lasting and haunting impression. They speak to the absolute power of the pharaohs and the value placed on their post-mortem comfort above all else. Even in death, the pharaohs commanded the living. Their sacred status meant their journey to the afterlife was all that mattered, no matter how many had to die to ensure it. This is perhaps best summed up by the inscription on the tomb of the 6th dynasty courtier Veni the Elder. He proudly describes his role in building the royal tomb, saying, "His Majesty sent me to Et to bring the sarcophagus with its lid, and the costly August pyramidion for the pyramid called Menorah shines, and is beautiful of the Queen. I did it all in the completeness and exactness which His Majesty loves." The pharaoh's eternal resting place was paramount, sparing no expense, effort, or life. But not all pharaohs clung to these dark sacrificial practices. The reign of Akhenaten, the controversial king who upended Egyptian religion by worshipping only the sun, discernible for its lack of evidence of human sacrifice. Akhenaten moved the capital to a new city, Akhetar, known today as Amarna. Here he built a royal tomb with no subsidiary graves, perhaps signaling a shift in airy customs to match his religious reforms. However, Akhenaten's changes were short-lived. After his death, his son Tutankhamun and successors returned to the old gods and traditional practices. Tutmosis' famous tomb, discovered in 1922, was stocked with all the traditional grave goods and mummified remains of his several stillborn daughters. Though not sacrificed in the old way, these children still accompanied him to the afterlife as eternal reminders of his divine blood. And so, even as human sacrifice waned, the pharaonic obsession with the afterlife never did. The mummification process grew ever more elaborate, with pharaohs like Seti, the Firm, and Ramses II going to their eternal rest in multi-room hidden tombs filled with every earthly treasure. They were still meant to live forever as gods among the gods, even if their retinue of ghostly servants was now rendered in wood, clay, and stone rather than flesh and blood. This enduring belief in the pharaoh's divinity, in earthly eternity attained, is perhaps their most lasting legacy. Long after their tombs were looted and bodies scattered, the pharaohs are still with us. Resurrected in our history books and museum galleries, we still speak their names. Khufu, Nefertiti, Hatshepsut, Tutankhamun, and marvel at their monuments. They built for eternity, and in many ways they achieved it, though not as they might have imagined. For the pharaohs, eternal life was a given, a birthright of their divine status. For their subjects, the afterlife had to be earned through service, both in this life and the next. This fundamental divide, the chasm between the god-kings and the rest of humanity, is what makes their world at once so dazzling and so alien to our eyes. It was a world where one person by accident of birth could command the living and the dead, move mountains and rivers, and shape the very landscape of eternity. That was the power and the burden of the pharaohs, the sons of ancient Egypt, who lived, ruled, and died as gods on earth. And yet, for all their power and splendor, the pharaohs were still mortal men and women. They suffered from the same human frailties: disease, injury, family drama, political intrigue. They just did so on a much grander scale, befitting their exalted status. This is perhaps what makes them so endlessly fascinating, so ripe for continual study and speculation. They were larger than life, but still life's untouchable gods, but still flesh and blood. In the end, maybe this is what draws us back again and again to the lives of the pharaohs. They built the pyramids and great sphinx, grand temples and hidden tombs, but they also loved their children, mourned their dead, and hoped for eternity. They were both extraordinarily powerful and extraordinarily human, and that more than any monument or mummy is their most enduring legacy. The reminder that even the most exalted among us are still one of us. Even a pharaoh beneath the crowns and finery, the incense, smoke, and chanting priests, was still a person making their way in the world, looking ahead to the next. The ancient Egyptians believed that to speak the name of the dead was to make them live again. Perhaps then we are all part of the pharaoh's afterlife. Every time we tell their stories, ponder their lives, and marvel at their works. They built their tombs and pyramids to last till the end of time, and in doing so, they built themselves into the very bedrock of our history. The pharaohs may be gone, but they are not forgotten. They live on in our collective memory, as real and vivid as the paint on their tomb walls. And so we keep them and their extraordinary, disturbing, dazzling world now and for all eternity. And so we lay the pharaohs to rest, as they were laid to rest so long ago, with reverence, with wonder, and with the whisper of their names echoing down through the ages. Sleep well, god kings and queens of the Nile. May your car endure, your bar take flight, and your stories be told for all time. And thank you, dear listener, for accompanying us on this journey into the distant past. May the peace of the pharaohs be with you, and may your dreams be as sweet as the lotus blossoms on the Nile. Good night. The immense power and influence wielded by the ancient Egyptian pharaohs is truly mind-boggling to contemplate, even thousands of years later. As both divine figures and absolute monarchs, these god-kings lived lives of luxury and excess that would be unimaginable to the average person. But hand in hand with their privileged status came a darker side, one full of deadly intrigues, power-hungry machinations, and disturbing practices that revealed the heavy burden and often twisted realities of sitting on the throne of Egypt. It was a gilded cage in many ways. Take for example the pharaoh's daily routine. While it may have been filled with the finest foods, servants attending to every whim, and leisurely pursuits like hunting, boating, and board games, it was also rigidly prescribed by religious duties and superstitious rituals. Every aspect was governed by a desire to maintain the proper order of the universe. So, a pharaoh couldn't simply wake up and do as he pleased. There were temple rites to perform, offerings to make, and a pantheon of gods to appease. The Egyptians believed that the pharaoh had to carry out these rituals in order for the cycles of nature, like the life-giving Nile floods, to continue. That's a heavy responsibility to bear. Even the pharaoh's personal grooming was laden with meaning. Washing in sacred water from the Nile, shaving their heads, and donning copious amounts of perfume, makeup, and jewelry wasn't just about vanity. It was a way of setting themselves apart, of embodying the divine on earth. And it didn't stop at appearances. Practically every minute of a pharaoh's day was scheduled and accounted for. From petitions and offerings in the morning to touring building projects and consulting with advisors in the afternoon. Even their moments of rest and leisure in the evening were shaped by tradition and the need to be seen as more than human. The pressure to live up to this superhuman ideal must have been immense, and it bred more than a few pharaohs who, drunk on power and self-arrangement, took things to dark and disturbing extremes in their quest to be the supreme ruler on both earth and in the afterlife. You can see this most clearly perhaps in the kind of megalomaniac building projects that pharaohs undertook. Not content with your average tomb or memorial temple, some commanded their subjects to toil for decades on massive glorious monuments to themselves. The Great Pyramid of Giza, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, is a perfect example. This was commissioned by the pharaoh, Khufu, around 2550 BC, standing over 480 feet tall and comprised of over 2 million limestone blocks. It was the tallest man-made structure in the world for almost 4,000 years. The logistics and labor that went into building Khufu's pyramid are staggering to contemplate. Stones weighing an average of over 2 tons had to be quarried, transported, and assembled with absolute precision using only primitive copper chisels, bronze saws, wooden rollers and sleds, ramps, levers, and pulleys. Experts estimate it took over 20,000 workers and as long as 27 years to complete. And for what? All to house the corpse of one man and ensure his safe passage to the afterlife. It's an astounding and some would say appalling display of power and self-arrangement. Not to mention that life was incredibly harsh for the armies of workers who built pyramids like Khufu's. They may not have been slaves as popular lore often suggests, but the back-breaking work took a serious toll. Scans of skeletal remains from the workers' cemetery show high rates of arthritis, injuries, and stress. Pyramid building eventually fell out of favor, perhaps becoming too costly and time-consuming, even for the pharaohs. But the rich and powerful still found other ways to flaunt their wealth in the face of death. Take King Tutankhamun, the famed boy king who ruled in the 14th century BC. While he died young and had a relatively short reign, his golden death mask and opulent grave goods have become enduring symbols of ancient Egypt's wealth and splendor. When Howard Carter unsealed King Tut's small tomb in 1922, he found room after room stuffed to the brim with a dazzling array of over 5,000 priceless objects, golden shrines, jewel-encrusted chests, intricately carved furniture, chariots, clothes, perfumes, and even food and wine to sustain Tut in the afterlife. The sensational discovery ignited a wave of Tut mania around the world and introduced millions to the glories of ancient Egypt. But it also highlights the phenomenal excess enjoyed by the pharaohs, even the minor ones like Tutankhamun. Some rulers took it even further, burying loyal subjects with them to serve them in death as they had in life. This is a practice known as retainer sacrifice, and evidence for it has been found in some of the earliest royal tombs going back to the First Dynasty around 3000 BC. In tombs at the royal burial ground of Abydos, archaeologists discovered the remains of court officials, servants, and even dogs arrayed around the pharaoh's sarcophagus and subsidiary graves. It seems these unlucky attendants were sacrificed to continue their duties in the afterlife. A disturbing reflection of how much the pharaoh's power extended beyond the grave. Thankfully, this practice seems to have largely died out by the Old Kingdom period, but the fact that it was ever condoned at all is a chilling reminder of the absolute godlike power ancient Egyptians invested in their kings. Even as mummification techniques became more and more refined, and the fabled Valley of the Kings filled with hidden tombs, the gulf between the pharaoh's eternal comfort and the lot of the average Egyptian couldn't have been starker. While the royals enjoyed gold, jewels, and linen wrappings in the afterlife, most people had to make do with a simple pit grave and a few humble trinkets, if that. The inequality was so stark, it's little wonder that tomb robbing became a constant scourge for Egyptian elites. Still, the promise of eternal life, however luxurious, was one that even the pharaohs couldn't always count on, as the fates of some of the most famous rulers attest. Take Ramses II, widely regarded as the greatest and most powerful pharaoh of the New Kingdom. His reign, which lasted an astonishing 66 years, from 1279 to 1213 BC, marked the peak of ancient Egypt's imperial power and prosperity. Ramses II, or Ramses the Great, as he's often known, was a military leader who expanded Egypt's reach in Nubia, Libya, and the Levant. He was also a prolific builder who erected many grand temples, statues, and monuments. But for all his glory in life, Ramses II didn't exactly get the restful and dignified eternity he probably expected. His mummy has been moved and disturbed countless times over the millennia, as tomb robbers, priests, and archaeologists have all had a hand in its fate. When Ramses' mummy was finally unwrapped in 1886 by Gaston Maspero, the head of the Egyptian Antiquities Service, it was found to be in poor condition. The king's body was broken into pieces. Many bones were missing, and a gaping hole in the skull suggested the work of ancient lutters. Still, with his long aquiline nose, strong jaw, and shock of white hair, Ramses was an imposing figure even in death. His mummy is now on display at the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization in Cairo, a far cry from his original resting place in the Valley of the Kings, but no less a potent symbol of his enduring power and mystique. In the end, perhaps it's this very mystique, this mix of the marvelous and the macabre, the inspiring and the unsettling that keeps us so fascinated by the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. They were larger-than-life figures who wielded immense power and wealth, but they were also mortal men subject to the same fears, foibles and fates as the rest of us. Peering into their lives, their triumphs and excesses, their vanities and vulnerabilities is like holding up a mirror to the human condition. We see the heights to which we can ascend and the depths to which we can sink. We marvel at the ingenuity and artistry of an ancient civilization, even as we recoil at some of its more disturbing practices. Most of all, we come face to face with the stark realities of power, its seductions and its pitfalls, its uses and its abuses. The pharaohs may have ruled as gods on earth, but they were also prisoners of a system that demanded constant displays of strength, piety, and conspicuous consumption. In that sense, perhaps we can even feel a twinge of sympathy for these divine rulers, trapped in their gilded cages, burdened with the weight of an entire civilization's hopes, dreams, and fears. It's a far cry from the glamorous and carefree existence we might imagine for a god-king. But then again, that's the enduring allure of ancient Egypt. It defies our expectations and challenges our assumptions at every turn. It is a civilization that was at once familiar and alien, majestic and monstrous, enlightened and beneficent. And the pharaohs, for all their flaws and foibles, were the avatars of this endlessly fascinating world. They may have lived and died thousands of years ago, but their stories, their secrets, and their splendors continue to haunt us to this day. We will likely never fully unravel all the mysteries of the pharaohs and their world, but that doesn't stop us from trying, from poring over every scrap of papyrus, studying every mummy and monument, sifting through every grain of desert sand for clues to their lives and times. In a way, that's the greatest legacy of the pharaohs, not the pyramids or the golden treasures, but the enduring sense of wonder and curiosity they inspire in us. The tantalizing glimpse they offer into a world at once vanished and vivid, lost and everlasting. So perhaps the real question is not what we can learn from the pharaohs, but what we can learn about ourselves in our endless fascination with them. What does our obsession with these ancient rulers say about our own hopes, dreams, and fears? What does it reveal about our relationship to power, to death, to the eternal mysteries of the human heart? These are questions that may never have definitive answers, but they are worth pondering nonetheless, just as the pharaohs themselves continue to beguile and bewilder us, inviting us to explore ever deeper the labyrinthine recesses of their world and our own. And so the story of the pharaohs endures, as it has for millennia, a tale of power and powers, of glory and despair, of the eternal dance between light and shadow that defines the human condition. It is a story that will continue to be told and retold as long as there are those who seek to peer behind the veil of history and glimpse the faces of those who once ruled as gods among men. The pharaoh would begin his morning ablutions in an ornate limestone washroom, where a small army of servants waited to assist their living god. First, they would delicately wrap him in fine linen towels and escort him to a gleaming copper bathing tub filled with water, lotus flowers floating on the surface. As he stepped in, the servants would carefully wash the pharaoh's body with natron, a mineral salt that cleansed and softened the skin. They paid special attention to his hands and feet, gently scrubbing away any dirt or impurities. After bathing, the pharaoh would be dried off, and a servant would appear bearing a tray of fragrant oils. With practiced motions, he would anoint the king from head to toe, massaging the oils into his skin until it glowed. These sacred unguents, incense of myrrh, frankincense, and cinnamon, were believed to have magical protective properties, shielding the pharaoh from evil spirits and misfortune. A dab of black coal was carefully applied around his eyes, not just for beauty, but to deflect the harsh glare of the sun god Ra and ward off eye infections. Next came the pharaoh's iconic regalia, the crowns, scepters, and jewels that denoted his supreme status. Every item was imbued with layers of religious and political symbolism. The distinctive double crown, for example, represented the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under the pharaoh's divine rule. The designated would present lavish offerings of food, drink, clothing, and jewelry, symbolically giving the god all the best produce of the land. In return, the deity would bestow divine favor and protection on Egypt and empower the pharaoh to rule wisely and defeat his enemies. This sacred transaction between the king and the gods was the bedrock of Egyptian cosmic order, but it was also a daily reinforcement of the pharaoh's precarious position. His people believed his piety and right conduct literally sustained the cycles of the sun, the Nile floods, and the agricultural bounty of the kingdom. It was a heavy responsibility to shoulder day in and day out. With his religious duties complete, the pharaoh would begin the real work of governing, a task he largely delegated to his most trusted advisors. The pharaoh, diplomats from foreign lands would present tribute and tokens of respect in exchange for trade, concessions, and treaties. The pharaoh would hear each matter in turn, consulting with his advisors and rendering judgments with an authority that could not be questioned. Even in his leisure time, the king was performing his royal role. He would go on ceremonial hunting expeditions in the desert, firing arrows at lions and other big game from a speeding chariot. His body and possessions away from thieves and intruders for all eternity. A secure staging ground for his journey to immortality. But building such a monumental tomb came at a staggering cost, both in resources and human lives. The Great Pyramid required a workforce of skilled masons, engineers, and laborers on a scale never before seen in Egypt. Contrary to popular belief, these were not slaves, but paid workers, many of them peasant farmers recruited during the annual Nile flood when their fields outside the king's enclosure. The scale of the carnage is staggering, the largest known case of human sacrifice in ancient Egypt. The victims appear to have been framework we still use to pass ancient Egyptian chronology today. And it was under the tummies that the Egyptian priest scribe of Sebennytos penned a fascinating papyrus that has come to be known as the Dream Book. This enigmatic text lists nearly 200 different dreams and their supposed meanings. Some are rather mundane, like dreaming of eating figs, indicating the dreamer will come into money. But others are more sinister omens, like dreaming of being burned alive, signaling great danger ahead. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended with the tragic demise of its most famous queen Cleopatra II in 30 BC. After picking the losing side in the Roman civil war between Mark Antony and Octavian, Cleopatra took her own life, allegedly by the bite of a poisonous aspadid, through the streets of Rome as a war trophy. With Cleopatra's death, the long line of divine pharaohs finally came to a close, and Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. But the 3,000-year legacy the pharaohs left behind still endures. Every magnificent monument, every golden tomb treasure, every tall tale recorded on temple walls or papyrus scrolls has kept their larger-than-life life stories alive. The pharaohs built ancient Egypt into a flourishing civilization that has captured imaginations for millennia and will likely continue to do so for as long as the pyramids still stand. The mystique of the pharaohs lies in how, even at the distance of thousands of years, they still seem to straddle the line between gods and mortals, the natural and supernatural. The truth is, the pharaohs were both extraordinary and all too human. They performed mind-boggling feats of engineering, artistic, and cultural achievement that have rarely been matched. But they could also be petty, superstitious, ruthless, and tyrannical. They were a bundle of fascinating contradictions, chasing immortality while grappling with all the flaws and frailties of being human. So perhaps that's why, for all their power and pomp, the pharaohs still speak to us today. Their outsized lives are like monuments to the human condition itself, the soaring triumphs and the devastating lows that have defined the mortal experience since the dawn of civilization. The life of a pharaoh was one of immense power and privilege, but also one governed by strict religious duties and rituals. From the moment he awoke in his opulent palace, a pharaoh's day was meticulously planned and scheduled with little room for spontaneity or personal indulgence. The pharaoh's morning routine was an elaborate affair, with teams of servants attending to his every need. He would be washed, perfumed, and dressed in fine linens before donning the various crowns and symbols of his divine office. The distinctive double crown or pent combined the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbolizing the pharaoh's dominion over the unified land. But even in these mundane morning rituals, there was an undercurrent of magic and superstition. The pharaoh's clothing was imbued with powerful symbolism and believed to confer divine protection. Every cosmetic and item of jewelry had deep spiritual significance. Even the pharaoh's daily ablutions were a sacred rite, with priests reciting spells and incantations as sacred water from the Nile was poured over his head. With his regalia in place, the pharaoh would then consume a light breakfast before beginning his packed schedule of daily duties. As the earthly embodiment of the god Horus, one of the pharaoh's most vital roles was as the supreme religious leader of Egypt. He was responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order and balance, through his divine intercession with the gods. This meant that a significant portion of the pharaoh's day was taken up with religious ceremonies and temple rituals. He would make offerings to the gods, perform libations, and recite the necessary incantations to ensure the continued favor of the divine realm. These rituals were not just symbolic, but were believed to have a real and tangible impact on the prosperity and stability of Egypt. But the pharaoh was not just a religious figurehead. He was also the supreme political ruler of one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. After his religious duties were complete, he would hold court and meet with his advisors to discuss matters of state. The pharaoh had the final say on all issues of law, taxation, trade, and foreign policy. He would also hear petitions from his subjects and dispense justice as he saw fit. The concept of Ma'at extended to social order as well as cosmic balance, and the pharaoh was the ultimate arbiter of this earthly harmony. His word was quite literally law, and his judgments were considered infallible and However, even with all of these weighty responsibilities, the pharaoh still had time for leisure and pursuits befitting his exalted status. He might go hunting in the lush marshes along the Nile, or enjoy a sumptuous banquet with his courtiers and foreign dignitaries. Some pharaohs, like Amenhotep II, were known for their athletic prowess and would showcase their skills in archery or chariot racing. But even in these moments of relaxation, the pharaoh was never truly at ease. His life was governed by a strict code of behavior and a constant awareness of his divine role. Every action, every word, every decision was fraught with meaning and consequence. And beneath the surface of this gilded existence lurked a darker undercurrent of superstition, magic, and brutality. The pharaoh may have been the most powerful man in Egypt, but he was also the most vulnerable to the capricious whims of the gods and the machinations of his enemies. Jealous rivals both within the royal family and among the nobility constantly plotted and schemed to overthrow him. Sorcerers and magicians employed curses and hexes to bring about his downfall. Even the common people, though they revered the pharaoh as a living god, could turn against him if they felt he had failed in his divine duties. To protect against these myriad threats, both real and supernatural, the pharaoh relied on a complex web of magic and ritual. He wore amulets and talismans imbued with protective spells, and his food and drink were tested for poison by trusted servants. His palace was warded against evil spirits, and his bedchamber was guarded by the most loyal and fearsome of his warriors. But even with all of these precautions, the life of a pharaoh was a precarious one. The annals of Egyptian history are filled with the stories of pharaohs who met untimely and often gruesome ends. Opulent and glittering on the outside, but constricting and suffocating within. And yet, for all of its dangers and drawbacks, the allure of the pharaonic crown was an irresistible one. The chance to wield such godlike power, to shape the course of an empire, to have one's name etched into eternity. These were temptations that few could resist. And so, the cycle continued from one pharaoh to the next, each one striving to outdo his predecessors in grandeur and glory. Even as the shadow of mortality and the fickle favor of the gods loomed ever larger, such was the burden and the blessing of the pharaohs, the god-kings of ancient Egypt, whose bloody and brutal affair. While the pharaonic crown typically passed from father to son, there was no formal system of primogeniture, and rival princes and factions would often vie for power in the event of an unclear or contested succession. These power struggles could turn deadly, with rivals resorting to assassination, exile, or outright civil war to seize the throne. The most famous example of this was perhaps the mysterious death of Tutankhamun, who many historians believe was murdered by his advisor and successor in order to clear the path for his own body with natron salts, and the careful wrapping of the corpse in layers of linen bandages. The mummification process was overseen by a special class of priests known as the embalmer, who worked in secret and were considered to be in direct contact with the gods. They would recite special prayers and incantations at each stage of the process, imbuing the mummy with magical spells and protections that would ensure its safe passage into the afterlife. Once the mummy was complete, it would be placed inside a series of nested coffins, each one more elaborate and expensive than the last. The outermost coffin would often be made of solid gold and adorned with intricate carvings and inlays, a fitting vessel for the divine remains of the pharaoh. The mummy and its coffins would then be transported in a grand procession to the pharaoh's tomb, where they would be sealed away in a hidden burial chamber along with all of the pharaoh's grave goods and treasures. The tomb itself would be filled with even more offal and contained more than 2 million blocks of limestone. Was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. The construction of the Great Pyramid was a monumental undertaking that required the labor of thousands of workers over the course of decades. The logistics of the project were staggering, involving the quarrying, transportation, and precise placement of millions of tons of stone, all without the benefit of modern machinery or technology. But for Khufu, the pyramid was more than just a feat of engineering. It was a symbol of his divine power and a guarantee of his eternal life. The pyramid was designed to align with the stars, with shafts pointing towards the constellations of Orion and Sirius, which the Egyptians believed to be the celestial homes of the gods Osiris and Isis. Inside the pyramid, Khufu's mummy would have been placed in a granite sarcophagus in the heart of the structure, surrounded by treasure and protected by a complex system of passages, chambers, and booby traps designed to thwart would-be tomb robbers. But even with all legacy it was, from the magnificent temples of Abu Simbel to the sprawling complex of Karnak, Ramses left his mark on nearly every corner of Egypt. His reign saw military triumphs, like the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, as well as monumental building achievements, like the completion of the great hypostyle hall at Karnak, a forest of 134 massive columns covering an area of 54,000 square ft. But perhaps Ramses' most enduring legacy is the very fact that we know so much about him at all. With his relentless self-promotion and larger-than-life persona, Ramses ensured that his name would live on long after his death, and live on it, as Ramses remains one of the most famous and recognizable figures from the ancient world, a towering symbol of the power and majesty of the pharaohs. Of course, not all pharaohs were as successful in their quest for immortality as Ramses. Take for example the curious case of Akhenaten, the so-called heretic king, who ruled during the 18th dynasty. Akhenaten is best known for his radical religious reforms, in which he abandoned the traditional pantheon of Egyptian gods in favor of a single deity, the Aten, represented by the solar disk. Akhenaten's devotion to the Aten was all-consuming. He built a new capital city, Akhetaten, dedicated solely to the worship of his one true god. He changed his name from Amenhotep IV to Akhenaten, meaning devoted to Aten. He even altered the traditional style of Egyptian art, eschewing the rigid, formalized depictions of pharaohs and gods in favor of a more naturalistic, almost androgynous style. But Akhenaten's religious revolution was short-lived. After his death, his successors quickly abandoned Akhetaten and returned to the old gods, going so far as to deface and dismantle Akhenaten's monuments and temples. His name was struck from the records, his legacy all but erased. In the end, Akhenaten's single-minded devotion to his god led not to immortality, but to obscurity. And then there's the sad story of Tutankhamun, better known to us as King Tut. Tutankhamun is perhaps the most famous pharaoh of all time, thanks in large part to the stunning discovery of his intact tomb in 1922. But the life of this young king was marked by tragedy from the very start. Tutankhamun was born into a royal family in crisis. His father was none other than Akhenaten, and his mother was likely Akhenaten's own sister. Inbreeding was not uncommon among the Egyptian royalty, who believed that keeping the royal bloodline pure was essential to maintaining their divine status. But it also led to a host of genetic problems, including the congenital defects that plagued Tutankhamun throughout his short life. When Tutankhamun took the throne around the age of 9, he inherited a kingdom in chaos. Akhenaten's religious reforms had alienated the powerful priesthood and destabilized the country. Tutankhamun's advisors, including the vizier, and the general Horb, set about restoring the old order, reopening the temples, and re-establishing the cult of Amun. But Tutankhamun himself was a frail and sickly child, beset by a host of physical ailments. He suffered from a cleft palate, a clubbed foot, and a severe overbite. He walked with a cane, and may have even suffered from a rare genetic disorder called Klippel-Feil syndrome, which causes the fusion of the vertebrae in the neck. Despite his physical limitations, Tutankhamun did his best to fulfill his duties as pharaoh. He oversaw the restoration of the old temples and commissioned new building projects, including his own tomb in the Valley of the Kings. But his reign was cut tragically short. Tutankhamun died around the age of 19, possibly from an infection caused by a broken leg. The story of Tutankhamun is a poignant reminder of the human frailty that lurked behind the facade of divine power. For all their wealth and influence, the pharaohs were still mortal men, subject to the same flaws and weaknesses as the rest of us. And yet, through the enduring legacy of their tombs and their treasures, they achieved a kind of immortality after all, not as gods, but as enduring symbols of a fascinating and mysterious world that continues to captivate us to this day. As we've journeyed through the lives of these legendary rulers, from the excesses of Ramses, to the enigma of Akhenaten, to the tragedy of Tutankhamun, one thing becomes clear: the pharaohs were as complex and multifaceted as the civilization they ruled. They were gods and men, builders and destroyers, visionaries and tyrants. They lived lives of unimaginable splendor and opulence, but they were also haunted by the specter of death and the relentless pursuit of immortality. In the end, perhaps it is this very complexity that makes the pharaohs so endlessly fascinating to us. They were not just historical figures, but mythic archetypes, embodying the timeless themes of power, ambition, and the search for meaning in the face of mortality. And through the enduring legacy of their monuments and their stories, they continue to speak to us across the millennia, whispering secrets of a world long vanished but never truly lost. As we marvel at the pyramids and the temples, the golden masks and the hieroglyphic inscriptions, we are reminded of the indomitable human spirit that drove these ancient kings to reach for the stars. And we are humbled by the realization that for all their godlike power, they were ultimately as mortal as the rest of us, subject to the same joys and sorrows, triumphs and tragedies that define the human experience. So let us pay tribute to the pharaohs, those towering figures who shaped the course of history and left an indelible mark on the sands of time. Let us remember them not just as distant mythical figures, but as flesh and blood human beings, with all their flaws and foibles, their dreams and their despairs. And let us learn from their stories, both the inspiring and the cautionary, as we navigate our own paths through the shifting sands of life. For in the end, the legacy of the Pharaohs is not just a matter of bricks and mortar, gold and granite. It is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, to our unquenchable thirst for meaning and purpose, for beauty and transcendence. And it is a reminder that no matter how mighty we may become, we are all part of a tapestry far greater and more enduring than any one of us can ever hope to be. So let us give thanks for the Pharaohs and for all those who came before and after them, who strived and struggled and left their mark upon the world. And let us carry their stories with us as we venture forth into the unknown, armed with the wisdom of the ages and the courage of our convictions. For in the end, the measure of a life is not in the splendor of its monuments or the grandeur of its tombs, but in the love and compassion we show to one another and in the legacy of hope and resilience we leave behind. And in this, the Pharaohs, for all their flaws and failings, have much to teach us still. As we delve deeper into the shadowy world of the Pharaohs, we must also acknowledge the intricate web of royal relationships and rivalries that shape their lives and legacies. Behind the gilded facades of the palaces, a complex tapestry of family dynamics, political alliances, and power struggles played out, often with devastating consequences. At the heart of the royal household was the pharaoh's inner circle of queens, concubines, and children. While the pharaoh was the supreme ruler, his queens could wield significant influence, particularly if they bore him a male heir. The great royal wife, or chief queen, held a privileged position and might even rule as regent if the pharaoh died before his successor came of age. Such was the case with Hatshepsut, who boldly assumed the full powers and regalia of a pharaoh herself after the death of her husband, Thutmose II. But alongside these influential queens were countless lesser wives and concubines who populated the royal harem. These women, often from noble families or foreign princesses sent to cement diplomatic ties, vied for the pharaoh's favor and the chance to bear his children. The royal court buzzed with gossip, intrigue, and shifting alliances as different factions jockeyed for position. Most disturbing of all were the instances of incest that occurred within the royal family. Pharaohs often married their own sisters or half-sisters, and occasionally even their daughters, to keep the royal bloodline pure. It was believed that the pharaoh, as a living god, could only beget a legitimate heir through union with another divinity, even if that meant keeping it in the family. This practice may have contributed to genetic disorders and abnormalities in some royal offspring. Of course, not all royal siblings married each other. Some rivalries between princes and princesses burned red hot, exploding into murderous power grabs. Take for example the suspected plot by Ramses III's secondary wife, Tier to assassinate the pharaoh and install her own son Pentuer on the throne instead of the chosen crowned prince Ramses IV. Ancient papyrus court records paint a chilling picture of a harem conspiracy that ended in convictions and executions. Even the legendary Cleopatra III, last of the Ptolemaic dynasty, was no stranger to ruthless family rivalries. She allegedly had her own younger sister, Arsinoe IV, murdered to solidify her claim to the throne. In a world where royal blood was both a ticket to power and a reason to be eliminated by one's rivals, perhaps the frequent depictions of the pharaoh smiting his enemies take on an even darker meaning. But beyond the backstabbing intrigues of the royal court, the pharaoh's family relationships could also be touchingly human. Ramses II, for instance, honored his chief queen Nefertari with a lavishly decorated tomb and a magnificent temple at Abu Simbel, and even the Uftilified Akhenaten, who appended Egyptian religion and art during his reign, is shown in tender scenes with his wife Nefertiti and their daughters. In the end, perhaps these familiar bonds offered a bit of solace and sanity in the gilded cage of the royal palace. But make no mistake, being a pharaoh's relative was a double-edged sword that could cut short even the most regal life. From the incestuous unions to the cutthroat rivalries, the twisted family trees of the pharaohs bore strange and often poisonous fruit. The royal family was the most exclusive club in ancient Egypt and possibly the most dangerous. As we turn now to examine the pharaoh's exalted role as a living god on earth, keep in mind the tangled human relationships that lurked beneath that lofty divine surface. The pharaoh may have been the sun around which the Egyptian universe revolved, but the gravity of family, and political forces also yanked him in unpredictable directions, even as he strove to maintain cosmic order and harmony. In the worldview of the ancient Egyptians, the pharaoh was no mere mortal ruler. He, or in rare cases, she was a living god, the divine embodiment of the falcon-headed sky god, Horus, on earth. As the intermediary between the heavenly realm of the gods and the earthly domain of humans, the pharaoh played a vital role in maintaining the cosmic order, balance, and justice that held chaos at bay. This concept of divine kingship elevated the pharaoh to a superhuman status and imbued his every action with cosmic significance. From the moment most iconic of these, of course, are the Great Pyramids that loom over the Giza Plateau. These monumental structures built during the Old Kingdom were more than just tombs. They were cosmic engines designed to launch the pharaoh's soul into the heavens to take its place among the stars. The pyramid's smooth, sloping sides were meant to evoke the primordial mound of creation, while its precise alignment to the cardinal points mirrored the order and symmetry of the cosmos itself. But even more vital than the tomb itself was the complex process of preparing the pharaoh's body for the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians believed that the physical form was just as important as the spiritual essence, and that the two had to be preserved together for eternity. And so, in the sacred rites of mummification, the pharaoh's corpse was transformed from a lifeless husk into a vessel for immortality. For 70 days, the body was dried and desiccated with natron salt, its organs removed and carefully preserved in Coptic jars. Then, in an elaborate ritual that could take weeks, the mummy was anointed with sacred oils, wrapped in countless layers of linen, bandages, and adorned with protective amulets and jewelry. The face was often covered with a lie-like mask of gold and precious stones, an idealized portrait of the pharaoh in all his divine glory. But the pharaoh's journey was far from over. Once the mummy was complete, it had to be transported to the tomb in a grandiose procession, accompanied by priests chanting hymns and spells to ward off evil spirits. The sarcophagus was then lowered into the burial chamber, surrounded by all the grave goods the pharaoh would need in the afterlife: furniture, clothing, jewelry, even food and drink to sustain him on his eternal journey. And here is where the pharaoh's preparations took a darker, more disturbing turn. For some rulers, it wasn't enough to be buried with mere objects. They wanted to be accompanied by actual living servants, ready to attend to their every whim in the hereafter. These unfortunate souls, known as retainers, were often the pharaoh's most loyal courtiers and officials, handpicked to serve him in death as they had in life. The practice of human sacrifice was not uncommon in the early dynasties of ancient Egypt, particularly during the First Dynasty. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals numerous subsidiary burials surrounding the tombs of pharaohs, like Horahar and Jay, containing the remains of servants, bodyguards, and even women and dwarves who were believed to have special powers. One of the most chilling examples comes from the tomb of King Jay at Abydos, where the remains of over 300 individuals were found buried in neat rows, like a macabre honor guard flanking the pharaoh's final resting place. Many of the bodies showed signs of strangulation or blunt force trauma, suggesting that they had been deliberately killed to accompany their ruler into the afterlife. But perhaps even more unsettling than the human sacrifices were the animal ones. Countless mummified cats, dogs, monkeys, and even lions have been found in Egyptian tombs, often lavishly wrapped and adorned like miniature pharaohs themselves. These beloved pets were believed to provide companionship and protection for their masters in the afterlife, a consolation prize of sorts for an eternity spent in the dark. And then there were the more bizarre grave goods, like the millions of human hair wigs found in some tombs. These elaborate hairpieces, made from the shore locks of courtiers and slaves, were meant to ensure that the pharaoh always had a fresh coiffure, even in the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians believed that hair had magical properties and that a full luxuriant wig was a sign of vitality and power. But as the centuries passed, the practice of human sacrifice gradually fell out of favor. By the time of the New Kingdom, the idea of killing servants to serve the pharaoh in the afterlife was seen as barbaric and uncivilized. Instead, the Egyptians turned to more symbolic methods like placing shapy figurines in the tomb to magically come to life and perform menial tasks for the deceased. Yet, even as the physical sacrifices faded away, the psychological toll of the pharaoh's obsession with the afterlife remained. The vast resources and manpower poured into their tombs, Andori cults siphoned away wealth and labor from the living, while the idea of a ruler who could command obedience even in death cast a long shadow over Egyptian society. And in the end, for all their elaborate preparations and precautions, the pharaohs could not escape the ravages of time and tomb robbers. Many of their carefully constructed resting places were plundered and desecrated over the millennia, their mummies and grave goods scattered to the four winds. In a bitter irony, the very measures they took to ensure their immortality ended up being their undoing. But even in death, the pharaohs continued to fascinate and horrify us in equal measure. Their mummies, with their uncanny lifelike expressions and aura of ancient power, have become the stuff of legend and popular culture. And as we peer into their tombs and sarcophagi, we cannot help but feel a shiver of awe and revulsion at the lengths they went to in pursuit of eternal life. For the pharaoh's death was not the end, but merely the beginning of a new and glorious existence. But as we have seen, that existence came at a terrible cost, measured in human lives and labors. And in the end, perhaps the most disturbing thing about the pharaoh's afterlife obsession is not what it says about them, but what it says about us and our own deep-seated fears and fascinations with the great beyond. As we emerge from the Stygian depths of the pharaoh's tombs blinking in the harsh light of the modern day, we cannot help but feel a sense of vertigo, a disorientation at the vast gulf of time and culture that separates us from these ancient god-kings. And yet, for all their aliveness and inscrutability, there is something strangely familiar about them too, a recognition of the eternal human struggle against the forces of death and decay. In our own way, we are all pharaohs building our own metaphorical pyramids and filling our own virtual tombs with the trappings of our earthly existence. We may not command armies of servants or erect colossal monuments to our own divinity, but we are all engaged in the same basic quest for meaning and immortality in the face of the void. And so, as we bid farewell to the pharaohs and their haunted realm, let us take a moment to reflect on the enduring power of their legacy. For all their flaws and foibles, these ancient rulers left an indelible mark on human history and the human imagination, one that continues to resonate down through the ages. In the end, perhaps the most fitting tribute to the pharaohs is not the golden grandeur of their tombs, but the simple fact that we are still talking about them, still trying to unravel the mysteries of their lives and deaths thousands of years after they walked the earth. In a way, they have achieved the very thing they sought so desperately in life, a kind of immortality, a persistence in memory and myth that transcends the bounds of time and space. And so let us raise a metaphorical glass to the pharaohs, those strange and terrible demigods who ruled over the sands of Egypt so long ago. May they rest in peace, secure in the knowledge that their names and deeds will never be forgotten. As long as there are those who seek to peer into the shadows of the past and grapple with the eternal questions of life, death, and what lies beyond. As we've seen, the pharaohs of ancient Egypt lived lives of luxury, power, and religious devotion unparalleled in the ancient world. But for all their godlike status and opulence, one distinct fact remained. Even the great pharaohs could not escape the inevitability of death, and it was their obsessive preparations for the afterlife that would come to dominate much of their time, resources, and labor during their reigns. The Egyptian preoccupation with death and what lay beyond stemmed from their belief in an eternal afterlife. They envisioned a paradise where they would continue to live as they had on earth, engaging in the same daily routines and pastimes. But to achieve this immortality, great pains had to be taken to preserve the body and provide all the necessities the deceased pharaoh would need. This is where the famous Egyptian practice of mummification comes in. The elaborate process could take up to 70 days and involved removing internal organs, drying out the body with natron salt and wrapping it in layers of linen, performed by skilled embalmer. Mummification was a vital step to ensure the pharaoh's body would remain intact for the afterlife. But a well-preserved mummy wasn't enough. The eternal pharaoh would also need food, clothing, furniture, jewelry, and entertainment to sustain and occupy them. Enter the grave goods. Tombs were packed with all manner of worldly possessions, from basic necessities to intricate works of art. The famous golden death mask of Tutankhamun is just one example of the literal treasures the pharaohs took with them. Even more important than the mummy and grave goods, however, was the tomb itself. The ancient Egyptians believed that to enter the afterlife, the pharaoh's spirit had to have a place to return to and recognize as home. This is why they expended such effort to create indestructible, impenetrable tombs filled with everything the deceased would need. We've marveled at the pyramids of Giza, but they are only the beginning when it comes to the pharaonic obsession with monumental tomb building. In the Valley of the Kings near Thebes, later pharaohs abandoned the conspicuous pyramids and instead carved their tombs deep into the mountains. These sprawling rocky tunnel systems were designed to foil grave robbers and protect the pharaoh's spirit for all of eternity. Some pharaohs, though, took their quest for a secure and luxurious afterlife to even greater and more disturbing extremes. The tomb of King J, from the First Dynasty, was found to contain the remains of 318 men and women who had apparently been sacrificed upon his death. These retainer sacrifices were a grim practice, where servants, officials, and possibly even family members gave their lives to continue serving the pharaoh in the afterlife. Thankfully, by the time of the New Kingdom, Human sacrifice for the pharaoh's afterlife had fallen out of practice. But that didn't stop some from making other bizarre arrangements. Amenhotep II was found buried with millions of human hair wigs, while Ramses II was interred with his beloved pet cat. Even in death, it seems the pharaohs were loath to give up the extravagant trappings of their divine earthly existence. Of course, for all their painstaking plans and precautions, many pharaonic tombs were looted over the centuries. The fabulous treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb only survived because it was lost and forgotten. But that doesn't take away from the fascinating and, yes, disturbing lengths the pharaohs went to in their quest to cheat death and ensure their immortality. Their tombs, mummies, and the priceless relics interred with them have given us an unparalleled glimpse into one of history's most captivating and enduring cultures. The mummies of the mighty pharaohs are still yielding their secrets today, thanks to modern archaeological science. CT scans and DNA testing are allowing us to virtually unwrap these ancient kings and queens and peer into their lives and lineages like never before. In a way, then the pharaohs did succeed in securing their immortality, if not quite in the way they intended. Their mortal remains and belongings continue to enthrall and educate us thousands of years later, and as we unravel more mysteries of their world, we come that much closer to understanding the lives and minds of these legendary rulers who held sway over the Nile and still command our imaginations today. But no study of the pharaohs would be complete without also acknowledging some of the most famous and infamous individuals to wear the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Legendary names like Ramses the Great, the indomitable Hatshepsut, the Sun Wandering in his time. Now that's a kingly legacy. And speaking of a royal family tree, one cannot forget the 18th dynasty pharaoh Akhenaten and his legendary wife Nefertiti. Thank you for listening to Whispered History. If you enjoyed this quiet journey into the past, consider subscribing for more gentle stories from history. Now, rest well, and let the echoes of the past fade softly into the night.